Chapter 12. The High Stone Prison. The Bab was delivered into the custody of Ali Khan, the warden at Marku, where he was imprisoned inside a 4-towered stone fortress high on the summit of a mountain. Below the fortress, to the west, flowed the river Aras, called Araxes by the Greeks, forming the boundary between Persia and Russia. The Prime Minister, Haji Mirza Agassi, had chosen Marku for the Bab's imprisonment for several reasons. It was a wild and inhospitable region inhabited by Kurdish people who had always been the bitter enemies of the Persians. The Prime Minister had bestowed many favours upon this rebellious region, and he felt it was now under his complete control. Haji Mirza Agassi thought that imprisoning the Bab would cut him off permanently from his followers and would separate him from their activities. In this way his cause would be stifled at its birth and soon extinguished. Few, if any, would ever try to penetrate that unfriendly country. The plan was a failure. The hostility of the native people of Marku was gradually softened by the Bab's gentle manner and his loving influence. Their opposition to his teachings melted when they saw the wisdom of his words. Each morning they would come from the village of Marku and gather on the road below the prison, calling out to the Bab to ask for his blessing on their daily work. The Bab himself writes of those early days in Marku, "My companions are 2 men and 4 dogs." Yet, despite this isolation, his teachings reached the multitudes who gathered outside. He would dictate to Sayyid Hussein of Yazd, who had been brought with him in captivity from Tabriz, and made excursions into town to buy provisions for the Bab. On a quiet day, the people at the foot of the mountain could hear the Bab's voice clearly. An eyewitness of those days has said, "Mountain and valley re-echoed the majesty of his voice. Our hearts vibrated in their depths to the appeal of his utterance." For the first 2 weeks, the prison warden Ali Khan did his best to discourage such practices, but he was unable to dampen the people's enthusiasm. He refused to permit any of the villagers to enter the Bab's presence, nor would he allow any of the Bab's followers who came to the mountain to remain in the village of Marku even for 1 night. Haji Mirza Agassi had warned Ali Khan of the dangers of falling under the spell of the Bab's charm. The Prime Minister considered the Bab an agitator who should be treated accordingly, and Ali Khan was determined not to let down his guard. However, as time went on, Ali Khan found himself increasingly helpless to resist his growing attraction to the Bab. During the 9 months of the Bab's imprisonment, from the summer of 1847 until April 1848, his hostility was transformed from enmity to devotion. One day he went to the Bab. "A poor man, a sheikh, is yearning to attain your presence," he said. "He lives in a masjid outside the gate of Marku. I pray you that I myself be allowed to bring him to this place, that he may meet you. By this act I hope that my evil doings may be forgiven, and I may be enabled to wash away the stains of my cruel behaviour towards your friends." Ali Khan's request was granted. From that moment on, he tried by every means in his power to make up for his past hatred. He did all he could to soften the rigour of the Bab's imprisonment. At night he would still close the gate of the village, but in the daytime those whom the Bab wished to see were allowed to visit him, converse with him, and receive his instructions. A.L.M. Nicholas writes, "All the historians tell us that in spite of the strict orders to keep the Bab from communicating with the outer world, the Bab received great numbers of disciples and strangers in his prison." Another source reports, So great multitudes continued to come from all quarters to visit the Bab, and the writings which emanated from his inspired pen during this period were so numerous that they amounted to, in all, to more than 100,000 verses. During this 9-month period in Maku, the Bab composed the monumental repository of his laws, a book known as the Persian Bayan. In it, the Bab defines his mission as twofold: to call men back to God and to announce the coming of the Promised One of all ages and religions. This great messenger of God, he said, would appear soon after himself. The station of this messenger yet to come was so exalted, the Bab told his followers, that if one were to hear a single verse from him and recite it, it would be better than reciting the entire Bayan 1,000 times. The Bab urged his followers to remember these words and to seek and find this great figure upon his own passing. He implied that his faith and that of the one to come after him were identical. They were one faith. The Bab was the herald, and the one yet to come was the author. This truth was now in the stage of seed, but in the day of him who was yet to come, its perfection would become apparent, and would blossom and bear marvelous fruit. Repeatedly the Bab told his followers that he was but the preparation for that great day of God promised in all the scriptures of the world's great religions. Christ had warned his disciples of the last days in these words, "Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come." The Bab echoed this warning, saying, "Be awake on the day of the apparition of him whom God will make manifest." The Bab's constant prayer during those months of captivity in Maku was that he might be able to prepare the soil of men's hearts for the coming of this great world shepherd. "O my God," he said, "through him destroy all tyrants, annihilate through his justice all forms of oppression." The Bab said that he spoke of his own suffering only so that he might serve as an example to his followers, so that they would not act towards him whom God shall make manifest, as the believers of the Quran acted towards the Bab. "Of all the tributes I have paid to him who is to come after me," the Bab wrote while at Maku, "the greatest is this, my written confession, that no words of mine can adequately describe him, nor can any reference to him in my book, the Bayan, do justice to his cause." The Bab left no question whatsoever in the minds of his followers as to his own station. He was the dawn, and the one to come was the sun. "Were he to appear at this very moment," proclaimed the Bab, "I would be the first to adore him, and the first to bow down before him." The historian Nicholas writes that when the Bab was asked for proofs of his mission, his answer was admirable for its precision and clarity. Nicholas found his explanations new and original, his literary work of profound interest. For the 9 months that the Bab was imprisoned in the fortress at Maku, he wrote prolifically. His followers came from all parts of Persia to visit him. After they had stayed for 3 days, the Bab encouraged them to return to their homes and continue the work of teaching and consolidating the faith. Not only was the Bab able to meet his followers in spite of the isolation imposed upon him by the Prime Minister, but, more important, he was given the time and opportunity to set down in permanent form the fundamental truths of his mission. In his solitary chamber, the Bab was not permitted to have even a lighted lamp. The winter was so severe that the water with which he washed himself would freeze in drops on his face. During this time, Mullah Hussein decided to visit the Bab at Maku. He had been teaching the cause industriously in the city of Mashhad. Mashhad is where the 8th Imam is buried, making the city the greatest center of pilgrimage in all of Persia. Half of the city derived its living from the flow of pilgrims coming to visit the shrine. All these people were now joined together against this teacher who might possibly deprive them of their livelihood. To denounce abuses of religion might be all right in some other city, but it was not acceptable in Mashhad, where everyone of every class was thriving on them. It was all very well for the promised one to come, and undoubtedly he had the right, but he certainly was a public nuisance. Mullah Hussein was told plainly by actions as well as words that it might be very thrilling to undertake the conquest of the world with the Bab, but there was a big risk involved, not to mention fatigue and danger, especially now, while everyone was enjoying perfect peace in a fine city where business was good and one could earn a living with ease and security. Mullah Hussein left Mashhad. He yearned for the pure, holy presence of the Bab. He told his friends, "I have vowed to walk the whole distance that separates me from my beloved. I shall not relax in my resolve until I shall have reached my destination." Ali Khan saw Mullah Hussein approaching Markoo one morning at sun-up. He went out to greet him, bringing a horse so that he might finish the final stage of his journey in ease. Mullah Hussein refused the mount, vowing to complete the entire journey to visit the Bab on foot. When Mullah Hussein reached the prison gate, he saw the Bab standing at the threshold. The Bab stretched forth his arms and affectionately embraced him. One day, as they stood together on the roof of the prison, looking out over the mountains of Azerbaijan, the Bab turned towards Mullah Hussein and quoted a prophecy saying, "Shiraz will be thrown into a tumult. A youth of sugar tongue will appear. I fear lest the breath of his mouth should agitate and upset Baghdad." The meaning of this verse was concealed. He told Mullah Hussein, but it would be revealed in the year 1853. He then related to Mullah Hussein many things that would happen in the future, and told him not to disclose them to anyone. As the Bab bade his last farewell to Mullah Hussein, he said to him, "You have walked on foot all the way from your native province to this place. On foot you likewise must return. Your days of horsemanship are yet to come. You are destined to exhibit such courage, such skill and heroism as shall eclipse the mightiest deeds of the heroes of old." The Bab instructed Mullah Hussein to visit the believers in each of the villages on his way home, and to convey to them the Bab's love and affection. "Inflame their hearts anew with the fire of the love of the beauty of God," he told them, "and endeavor to fortify their faith in this revelation. A few days after your departure from this place," the Bab said, "they will transfer us to another mountain. Ere you arrive at your destination, the news of our departure from Markoo will have reached you." The Bab's prediction soon came to pass. Those who had been sent by the Prime Minister to watch secretly and report what was taking place at Markoo sent back alarming news. People who had once been unfriendly were now showing the greatest respect and love for the Bab. In fact, people were coming from everywhere to visit him. Even Ali Khan, the warden, was enchanted, and was treating the Bab as a guest rather than a prisoner. Both fear and rage impelled the Prime Minister to issue an order for the instant transfer of the Bab to the castle of Chirik, which the Bab called the Grievous Mountain. Mullah Hussein was in Tabriz when the news of the Bab's transfer to Chirik reached him. The Bab said farewell to the people of Markoo. Their hearts were heavy at the sad sight of his departure. The one they had come to love so much was now going out of their lives forever. During his 9 months of captivity among them, they had recognized to a remarkable degree the power of his personality and the greatness of his character.